Coming up at 3:15 is Dr. Ella Cockbain, who's going to be talking about human trafficking, particularly in regards to the Ukraine conflict at the moment and the wider issue. So it's not just child trafficking, it's going to be human trafficking and various things that go with that time. Then later on at 3:45, we've got Sally Hayden, who's the author of My Fourth Time to be Drowned. Fantastic book. Do recommend it, by the way, which is looking at immigration in Libya and the situation there, also how everything ties together through that. Coming up later on, we're going to have a bit pre-recorded, hopefully if we can get pre-recorded working, for Nicola Kelly. And she's talking about covering immigration and asylum issues and trafficking through how she works with the Home Office to get stories, responses, and the issues that are faced with that. We've got John Stokes, who is absolutely fantastic, and he's going to be talking about fostering and some of his experiences with that. And Miranda Butler, who's going to talk about the legal issues that face us, human rights, and her experiences of working in the field as a barrister. We've also got a music act at the end, and we're going to have debate. We've got some bits from, you're going to hear from me quite a bit during this. We've got some videos from our team who will talk about what they do. So all in all, it should be quite an exciting and hopefully full event for us today. I'm not going to play Philip's video just yet because we've only got a few minutes until Dr. Cockbain is going to be up and running. So what instead, I'll sort of shift around some of what we did before and give you a bit of insight into what we do. That's a bit of a cliche to say it, but Love146 is different from many other charities. We don't just campaign for the end of child trafficking, we work on the ground with survivors of it to help them rebuild their lives, move forward, get support that they need. Now, part of that is we listen to their voices, and it's a really crucial thing that's often overlooked. If you're trying to do any policy or trying to advocate for it, you've got to put their voices first. You've got to listen to their voices because they inform the debate. They inform what you're going to do. Everyone's got their own different needs, so you have to listen to that, and that's where we come in. We also do things. We provide accommodation, we provide direct grassroots support to children and young people who may have been the victim of trafficking, exploitation, and abuse. And children who've been trafficked can often be overlooked. I mean, with Refugee Week coming up next week, I think everyone would agree that there's an important focus at this moment on refugees, and there should be. It's absolutely essential. We've seen what happened with the flight potentially to Rwanda at the earlier part of this week. So people are aware of refugees, they're aware of them in the news, they're aware of them in papers, they're aware of just hearing politicians talk about them. But that means they may have a very set of ideas about what they look like, how they act, where they're from. And that doesn't always tie in with reality or with trafficking. And if you take, for example, the Albanian young people we work with, they've been through incredible trauma, yet far too often, even by people within our own sector, can be seen as criminals themselves. They're overlooked in this whole debate about the need for protection, the need for really focused protection on children and young people. They're no less deserving of it, and they're no less deserving of protection. Boys in particular risk of being ignored and dismissed because people see them as men. They question, why do they need protection? You couple that with how they may find it difficult to talk about their feelings. This whole thing of masculinity, stereotypes of that, and not wanting to come forward, not opening up about things. So they, whether deliberately or quite often not deliberately, can hold things back. And that means you have to really work with them, build trust to be able to help them. But they can't be overlooked. And Love146 is all about putting children and young people first, no matter where they've come from. These children have very specialist needs, needs which local authority social services may not have the required resource and expertise to actually meet. It's quite a complex situation. And that's where we come in. We work with the children and young people to provide the emotional and physical support they need and to ensure they are brought to a place of safety and help them thrive. And I've just had a message there from our CEO from Select, who's actually said he is happy to speak live. So I will pass over to him now, if he's happy for that. And so If you can unmute, Phil, and
hello. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yep, can hear you.
Oh, okay, that's fantastic. Thank you very much, Daniel. The joys of a live event, even with pre-recorded material, are legendary. So I think you do a sterling job. I'm sure you'll manage to resolve those issues momentarily. So yeah, I think. Thank you, Daniel. You've certainly done the introduction justice there, and of course, you know, what Daniel's highlighted in terms of what we do, what we see when we're working with young people and children in particular is quite true. And I think the name of today's event is quite important in terms of heart and hope, because that is something that I certainly wanted to reflect in what I wanted to say around this, because the children that we work with, certainly from our perspective, are inspirational. Their aspirations are phenomenal. They want and are entitled to really that life of joy, hope, achievement, everything that we would want for us and for our children and for any other child. So when we work with these children, it's important, I think, and Daniel reflected this a little bit in terms of the definitions we use for refugees and unaccompanied children, etc. They are just children with the same aspirations and hopes of everybody else. So today really is a bit of a celebration, I think, of that, and a recognition of that, of the humanity that we see, that we all see and we all experience when we come into contact with those that are in need and vulnerable. And I think that point is an important one, even though they are in need and vulnerable. Could be us. We're all the same, especially with children and the equality that's required and they're entitled to in terms of that provision and care and support and focus from us all. So I think celebration is an important aspect of today and a reflection of that, as I've said. And I am conscious, I'm certainly aware now that the video that I did earlier on probably won't be played because you're going to hear a lot of what I'm already saying and sort of condensed. But this was something, again, I thought would be useful to reflect. And I'm sure that the many people who join us today may have a similar idea and seen similar things. But I've been lucky or unlucky enough to travel around the world on this issue, and I've met so many people who follow, the same approach, have that same humanitarian view as the people that we work with in the UK and elsewhere, and that's an inspiration, and it should be an inspiration for us all. That humanity, the approach that's unwavering when we talk about the protection of the vulnerable and what they are entitled to. And again, I'll use that term refugee, not as a cliche or as something that defines people, but as a recognition of the situations and circumstances from when they come and the vulnerability that presents in that journey. And millions of people follow that view, hold those values dear, and are inspirational, I think, to me and others. So that's an important, certainly from my perspective, an important aspect. We're not on our own. We don't do this in or in isolation. We do this together, even if we don't see those individuals. So that's a bit of a part, and I think that was part of the name, and that heart also relates to hope, because when we the toxicity and the hostility that's heaped on individuals, children included, it can be quite frightening. It doesn't need to be, in my view, and that's not to take away from the issue, because it is a serious issue, because it impacts the people's lives, but it can change. And with that focus of hope and care and love, actually, for our fellow human beings and for the children that are so vulnerable and so in need, for me, that's a joy. I believe I'm being told by my colleagues I need to, and next we're going to move hopefully to a video of our first speaker. So thank you, Daniel, for the opportunity to talk live. It's always great. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. I'm really excited by this, and I hope by the end of today we'll not only look at some of the issues, but be a bit joyful in terms of that. So thank you, Daniel.
Philip, thank you so much for stepping in there. That was greatly appreciated. So you've got a bit of a feel now. And we're now going to switch over to Dr. Ella Cockbain, and she's going to, as I said before, go through some of the details of trafficking and Ukraine. So if you're ready, I will just spotlight you and we're ready to go.
All good?
Okay.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much, Dan, and thanks everyone at Love146 for organising today and having me here. Thanks everyone for coming. So I'm Ella Cockbain and I'm an associate professor at UCL. I work in the Department of Security and Crime Science. And for the last decade, my research has mostly focused on human trafficking, child sexual abuse, and various forms of labour abuse. And today I feel like I'm going to struggle to deliver on Philip's brief of joy right now. Today I'm going to be talking specifically about the war in Ukraine and what some of the risks within that are from a trafficking and exploitation perspective. So this very much builds on a recent roundtable that we at UCL organised with the Anti-Slavery Commissioner, Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner for the UK, which took place in April. And what we did was we brought together over 100 participants from the UK and internationally from across NGOs, other frontline organisations, healthcare, law enforcement, lawyers, government, academia. And essentially what this functioned as was a rapid evidence gathering exercise designed to understand what were the emergent issues and concerns already being identified, what were the key risks and worries that people had, and what were their recommendations to try and address these issues? And importantly, also, what were their words of caution? Because in the anti-trafficking field, there's a long history of interventions that may or may not be well-intentioned, having quite harmful effects in some cases. So it's really important to be aware of that side of it. And the report has since been published and it's available on the Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner's website if you're interested in more detail around any of this. So today I'm going to be talking about the 5 key themes that my co-author Hayden and I identified through the analysis of the discussions. And from those themes, there followed 25 concrete policy recommendations, and I'll mention a few of those today, but the rest of them are in the report. So the first kind of big theme was the recognition that conflict in itself can be a very powerful driver of human trafficking and exploitation. And we deliberately framed this event around trafficking and exploitation rather than just trafficking. And the reason for that is because trafficking isn't necessarily this kind of clear-cut, easily identifiable phenomena. And it's increasingly widely accepted that a better way to look at it, rather than a binary trafficking, not trafficking, is as a sort of spectrum of exploitation, and situations can constitute trafficking sort of up towards the extreme end. People can move in and out of situations that might be seen as trafficking. So yes, that was a deliberate decision. And what emerged from the roundtable was there was a real sense that new risks specific to the war in Ukraine were interacting with existing systemic issues and creating a very concerning climate. And because of the demographics of the majority of people fleeing Ukraine, there were particular concerns around women, around children, especially unaccompanied or separated minors, around the elderly, people with disabilities, undocumented migrants, and non-Ukrainians, to name some kind of key examples. But in identifying these groups as kind of groups of particular concern, it's also really important to stress that these are not homogenous groups. So, you know, within the category woman or older person, there's obviously a huge amount of variation and lots of factors that can affect risk and resilience towards, potential trafficking and exploitation. There was relatively little in the way of documented cases thus far, which in many ways is not surprising because you would expect it to take some time for that to come through. And generally with something like trafficking, we only ever get a very partial picture for lots of different reasons. But I think the important thing to say is this was not about sort of scaremongering and hysteria. You know, the vast majority of refugees' experiences will hopefully be positive. So this is not saying, you know, everyone is going to be trafficked. That's absolutely not the case. But it is important from a harm reduction perspective to be very clear about, you know, where the risks lie and what strategies need to be put in place to mitigate them. So there was very much a call for much more coordinated and nuanced work around prevention, around monitoring and support. And building on the thing I said earlier about resilience, there was a clear recognition that actually what the EU was doing with waiving the visa requirements for Ukrainians was actually very positive, because one of the long-standing issues in the trafficking evidence base is that when people are not able to travel safely, they then end up sort of much more likely to end up in risky situations. So actually, by letting Ukrainians fleeing the war travel without a visa, that removes a lot of these risks. It makes that travel cheaper, quicker, safer, and enables people to access things like housing and the labour market much more quickly. So that in itself was seen very much as a positive. And we'll come to the UK's response, which is in stark contrast in a second. Another big kind of overarching point there was that there was a clear recognition that the risks associated with trafficking in this war extend much further than sexual exploitation alone. And the media traditionally, and to a large extent still, tends to focus on sex trafficking. And part of that is a kind of sensationalist portrayal of trafficking risks. Whereas here there was a clear recognition that yes, there's risks in that space, but there's also risks around domestic servitude and around all sorts of other labour markets. So for those who aren't familiar, domestic servitude is exploitation within the private home context. And another really important word of caution here was that an anti-trafficking logic must not be used as a way of blocking people's routes to safety or as a way of legitimizing harms to already marginalized groups. So for example, irregular migrants or sex workers. And unfortunately, over the weeks since then, increasingly seeing this playing out. So this is what happens when, for example, the government says, you know, we're requiring visas because otherwise there's a trafficking risk. Well, the requirement for visas in itself puts people at other risks. Or similarly, the way that the war in Ukraine, I'm now seeing it being co-opted to push for certain legislation around sex work, which is actually kind of well documented to be very harmful. So moving to the second theme, this was about how the UK's visa-based response was widely seen to be actively creating risks of trafficking and exploitation and to be exacerbating existing risks. So there was considerable confusion even among professionals about the UK response. So we now have 3 Ukraine-specific visas, and the system was seen as being complex, fragmented and chaotic, with a real lack of clear guidance and support for various key parties involved, you know, be it hosts under the Homes for Ukraine scheme, be it refugees themselves, be it councils and so forth. The visa system itself, like I said, was seen as creating major issues in terms of delays and backlogs and the risks that means people are then at en route to the UK as well as once in the UK. So there was a very strong recommendation that came through to remove the visa requirement for Ukrainians. And that's important both from an anti-trafficking perspective and from a sort of welfare, well-being perspective more broadly. Recognizing that, you know, that may not necessarily happen as much as we would love it to. There was also a recommendation that at a minimum, the UK government should be looking to extend eligibility for these visas and improve provisions under them. So what we have at the moment is a situation where certain groups of people completely fall through the gaps between these 3 visa schemes. So that includes Ukrainians who were already in the UK and became undocumented before the 1st of January this year. And it includes lots and lots of non-Ukrainians fleeing the same war. So particularly with the Homes for Ukraine scheme, there were also enormous safeguarding concerns sort of throughout the entire process there in terms of, you know, the checks that are carried out, the matching process, particularly social media matching, and limited oversight and support. And here again, it's important to emphasize that, you know, thousands and thousands of people have signed up to host people in their homes. And hopefully the vast majority of these placements will work out very well. At the same time, though, especially in their current state, there are real risks, both in terms of actively sort of predatory hosts who are deliberately going out of their way to exploit people, and in terms of exploitation that's much more kind of casual and opportunistic in nature. So concerns raised, for example, about risks of domestic servitude with a kind of gradual degradation of conditions, people more and more expected to take on unreasonable amounts of chores around the home, for example. Another real area of concern was around housing. So people coming under two of the three schemes, so Ukraine Family Scheme and the new Ukraine Extension Scheme, won't necessarily have any housing provisions. It's nothing tied to the visa, and they may well need support with housing. And similarly, there are increasingly accounts of hosting placements under Homes for Ukraine breaking down, and questions about, well, what next? Who's going to house these people? And in this context, it's really important to acknowledge that there is a housing crisis going on. So there really does seem to need to be much more foresight, much more funding, and much more support around accommodation. There's also some very worrying disparities between the schemes in terms of the financial side of it. So if you come under Homes for Ukraine, you're given a one-off £200 payment on arrival, which is, you know, in recognition that if you're fleeing your home, you're going to have some costs to carry. And similarly, a £10,500 payment is made to the local authority where you're housed. Yet for some reason, neither of these payments are available under the other schemes. Although, you know, there's no reason to think that people using the other visa schemes wouldn't have similar needs. So overall, with the kind of visa-based response, the key message was that there is a clear need for much more clarity, for much more resourcing, and much more accountability. And as a sort of spark of hope, Scotland did seem to come through as more of a positive example, both in terms of things like provisions under the super sponsor scheme, and in terms of actively sort of the government centrally setting up support around immigration rights, around labour rights, and ensuring those kind of important protective systems are more in place. So the third key theme was around information, and specifically that both information gaps and a kind of overload of information can in themselves exacerbate risks. So there was a widespread sense that there was very little in the way of clear, helpful, accessible information in this space, particularly from official sources. So what you have then, you know, unsurprisingly, is lots of other people stepping up to try and fill those gaps. So lots and lots of activity in this space, clearly lots of goodwill and a clear desire to help. But at the same time, very important concerns were raised about the risks of things becoming too fragmented, too decentralized, information being hard to find, and people seeking support potentially kind of being bounced pillar to post because of these complex pathways to getting help. So here there was a very compelling case for scaling back and being much more targeted and strategic around information sharing. So thinking about messaging, what are the goals? What are you really trying to achieve? Who are you trying to reach? How should you reach them? Who's best placed to help them, and so forth? And making sure that these pathways to support are as clear and as accessible as possible. So in this respect, I think something like Ukrainians Welcome, not to be confused with Ukraine Welcome, which is a different website. So Ukrainians Welcome is an NGO-led site that seeks to sort of a collaboration between lots and lots of different NGOs. It involves Unseen, who do the Modern Slavery Helpline, but it brings together lots of information about different aspects of things people may need information and support on, and signposts in various directions. So something like that, I think, since this roundtable has been a positive development. At the same time, it's also really important to be aware that it is not enough to simply warn people of risks of trafficking and exploitation. And that's often been the focus in the past with information campaigns. If people are in a very difficult situation and they have very limited options, there is often no choice but to do risky things. So it's really important to also work on building better, safer options, and also ensuring that there is that access to support if things go wrong. And what that also means is that there needs to be proper funding for these support services. The fourth theme, which I think is very salient right now, especially with all the news around Rwanda, was about how insecurity, fear, and the broader political climate around immigration and asylum, so the so-called hostile environment, create a very, very difficult situation within which to respond to the crisis in Ukraine and Ukrainian refugees. So people identified, for example, a real tension that they struggle to reconcile between this sort of ostensibly supportive and welcoming attitude towards Ukrainians and a much longer legacy of quite, hostile, nasty anti-migrant sentiment and policy. Immigration insecurity in itself isn't just a potential driver of trafficking and exploitation. It can also be a really potent barrier to seeking help. So one of the key recommendations here was the implementation of a firewall between law enforcement and immigration enforcement. And this is not new or specific to the conflict in Ukraine. This has been something that's been called for years as a way of making it safe for people who've got irregular migration status to come forward and report crimes that they've been victims of or witnesses to without fear of ultimately ending up deported. And again, the kind of other key sort of recommendations here about alternative pathways to support that go beyond official services alone, and about taking steps to dismantle the hostile environment, whereas the UK government is clearly going in the opposite direction, although it's been rebranded as the compliant environment. Recent developments like the Nationality and Borders Act and like the activity around Rwanda are enormously concerning and suggest that, if anything, we are heading very much in the direction of things getting a lot worse, not better. So sorry, there's no key message of hope in that one. Well, resistance actually is a key message of hope in that one, because, for all the government's attempt to denigrate lawyers, for example, we saw this week what great things can be achieved when, immigration lawyers do their job brilliantly. So the fifth key theme, which I'll end on, is about how long-term strategic planning was widely seen as being absolutely vital, but being largely lacking at present. And there was a general consensus that the UK needs to move beyond just improving its crisis response to also thinking about what happens in the medium and longer term. And that means thinking around provisions for placements that break down, access to support, ways of managing, mitigating and monitoring risk, and ensuring early intervention is there. And here, again, participants really stressed the importance of ensuring that responses were trauma-informed, and they focused on building people's rights rather than being a kind of more paternalistic sort of rescue type approach, and about the importance of involving Ukrainians themselves, both in strategy and in delivery, as well as migrant-led groups more generally who have considerable relevant experience in this field. And finally, then, there's this question of what happens if this war drags on. I mean, it's already been dragging on since 2014, since February this year, in its kind of amped up form. And there are very real risks here around things like compassion fatigue. And there's already some indications here and elsewhere of that starting to set in among the general public. And, at the moment, people arriving on the Ukraine-specific visa schemes have a 3-year permission to stay, but there's no route to settlement. Now, a lot of people will want to go home, but there may well be people who, by the point they're able to go home, don't want to go home or can't go home, or it would be very difficult to go home. So there really need to be some quite serious considerations around settlement options, I think. So yeah, that's it from me. The report, I can put the link to it in the chat if that would be useful. And thanks for having me. Press stop.
Thank you so much for that. That was brilliant, and I hope everyone agrees. And please do put the link in the chat. I've read the report and I would recommend reading it. It's fantastic, very informative, very well researched. But as I said, we are also looking at the positives here, and as we just said, One of them is resistance. We've seen communities come together. Peckham, only this week, Kenmure Street, famously in Scotland. There is positive things going out, but it doesn't necessarily come from up high. A lot of it's coming from the ground. But we're seeing it with Rwanda fights, ironically. We saw that something where it seemed almost inevitable towards the end, and then right at the last minute, there was hope, there was chance. It got stopped, because that's how these things work. Whether it works through people working together on the ground, campaigning, petitioning MPs, letters, but also supporting the challenges, being there to lawyers and legal advisors, researchers who provide all this information, but they need backup of everyone else. It's easy at the moment to look at things and lose hope and think, what can we do? What can I do as an individual? Well, that's the thing. Every movement starts with just one or two people. In Peckham, it was 2 people, I believe, who stood originally. There were more than 200 people by the end of it. Now, that's the thing. If it takes one person to stand, others will follow. And we have that. So there is always this to look forward to, and there is always something positive to bring out of this. And look at the Homes for Ukraine. There are so many issues with it, I grant, and there are so many things that we talk about as Love146 of being concerned about. But what also came out of it was this outpouring of support from people. So we do need to look at all the issues, and we need to look at the solutions, and we need to look at the fact that we are all in this together, no matter who we are, no matter what roles we play. But on that note, I'm going to attempt this time, so please do bear with me, to share another video with you. And this time it's of Imogen, who's our Director of Care Services, and she's talking about one of the case studies that we see.
Hi, I'm Imogen and I'm the Director of Services at Love146. I want you to take a moment to imagine a child that you know, a child that you love, perhaps a grandchild, your own child, a niece, nephew, a younger sibling, or a family friend. I want you to imagine that they've been through something challenging. Perhaps they're being bullied. Perhaps they've had an accident and are recovering in hospital. I want you to think about the people who will be supporting that child you love to help them through this emotionally challenging time. Who comforts them? Who cooks for them? Who talks them through how they feel and what they need to do next? Who gives them hugs and who makes them feel safe again? The children we support at Love146 do not have those things. No family, no friends, and no one to turn to. At Love146, we provide those things. A safe home, a good meal, practical support, someone to talk to. A supportive and loving approach for children like Danny. Danny was 13 when he was trafficked from Vietnam to the UK. An orphan, he was raised by his grandmother, but when he was 12, she died, and with no one to look after him, he found a restaurant that offered him somewhere to sleep and some food in exchange for his labour. You can imagine how hard this would be for a 12-year-old child. 18-hour days, no friends, no play, no education, and no care or love. After some months, a man asked Danny if he would like to work abroad. He told Danny he would fly him to Europe, and he would have to work to pay back the cost of the journey, after which he would be able to go to school. Danny accepted the offer. He was flown to China, and after a year or so of being moved around the world, he was taken to the UK. Danny didn't know that he'd fallen into the hands of criminal gangs. These gangs' business is to profit from the exploitation and misery that people trafficking creates. When social services asked us to help Danny, he'd been kept prisoner in cannabis farms in the UK for over 2 years. He'd slept on a roll mat, no bedding, under permanent strip lighting. in a chemically toxic building. Rescued by police during a raid and finally recognised as a victim of trafficking, Danny was placed in care. He was deeply traumatised, alone with no English and struggling to adjust. Our Vietnamese cultural worker sat beside Danny and told him things would get better. Our specialist social worker told him that what had happened was not his fault. Over time, with intensive care, love and support, Danny began to see a future for himself, and so did we. Love146 supports countless children like Danny, providing safe homes, intensive daily support and care, all the things that all children need, the things that trafficked children are promised but never received. The challenge continues to grow and the work does not stop. My highly skilled team are passionate, courageous and ambitious to provide a future for more trafficked children across the UK. Right now, we all know that we're living at a time of crisis and uncertainty, and that state-funded services cannot meet the needs of children like Danny. We know we have the skills and the commitment to continue and grow, and today you can help us do that. Your vital and continued support will change lives. Thank you.
That was Imogen Chapman, who's our Director of Services. I think there's something to bring up at this point of the trafficking is a hidden crime. You know, it often happens outside. We can be confident that the recorded statistics that we have are almost certainly underestimating the situation, particularly with the pandemic, where people haven't been spotted, haven't been identified. But from the data we do have, though, I mean, since 2012, there's been more than a 300% rise in recorded trafficking victims in the UK. And this doesn't simply mean that trafficking is on the rise. 1 in 4 victims of modern slavery are thought to be children, though. It sort of means that it is being spotted more as well. So we do need to be identifying this, and we need to ensure that we are spotting more people. Seeing it being on the rise is terrible, but it also potentially shows that we are more aware of it. People are paying more attention to it. That's where organisations like ourselves, but also everybody else comes in, of being able to help with this identification. And I mean, we're determined that we'll reach a point where all children can be provided with the care they need, and more particularly reach a point that we end child trafficking for good. That is our point. We work to put ourselves out of business. No child should face being trafficked. But with the growth, with the identification, we are seeing more children being trafficked. Now, does that mean more are, or we're watching out for it? That's the question, and I think that's something which we all do need to be aware of. Now, we're just coming up to time, and I believe that Sally Hayden is in the chat. So if you're ready, Sally, I'm going to switch to you now. And if
Hello.
Hi, Sally. Thank you so much. Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to switch my camera off now and pass over to you.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I appreciate being part of this. I've been asked just to speak a bit about my book that has just come out, and then if anyone has any questions, I'm also happy to answer them. I don't know if it's better if you put them in the chat so that I know that they're there, or I don't know how it's been happening, but anyway, whatever anyone wants. So the book is called My Fourth Time We Drowned, Seeking Refuge on the World's Deadliest Migration Route. And it came out in March. And basically, it looks particularly at what is happening in the central Mediterranean, which has been named by the UN as the deadliest migration route in the world, or certainly was. Basically the premise of the book, I got a Facebook message from somebody who was in a Libyan detention center in 2018, and it came out of nowhere. They basically said, "Hi, Sister Sally, we are under bad condition in Libya prison, and we need your help." And I had been reporting on migration related issues since 2015, including in Calais, in Syria, in Jordan, various other countries, Sudan. And I got this message, and I knew kind of vaguely what was happening in Libya, but I hadn't really followed it that closely. And so it still kind of shocked me and astounded me. And the message came from a man who was among 500 men, women, and children. They had been locked up in a detention center for months. They had all pretty much tried to cross the Mediterranean Sea and been intercepted by the Libyan Coast Guard, who are supported by the EU with both surveillance, like they carry out surveillance with helicopters, planes, and now drones. And also then they give the Libyan Coast Guard equipment and also train them. So this had been happening since 2017, the previous year. And basically it's, you know, people who are trying to seek safety who come from countries like Somalia, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Sudan, West Africa as well, who are trying to get to Europe to claim a, you know, a international right to claim asylum basically, but they don't have another route to do that unless they travel this incredibly dangerous way. So I was shocked. I mean, I initially thought that this was a particular, you know, a specific situation, that this was just one group of people, that maybe it was an oversight, and when they were saved, then, you know, things would be better. And actually, what happened was I started posting screenshots of their messages because it seemed like no NGOs could help. You know, there was no one available to actually do anything. I started posting screenshots of their messages on Twitter, and that ended up, as you say, going viral. The Twitter thread that I started ended up getting millions of views, and still no help is coming. So a result of that was that my contact details, my phone number, and everything got passed around different detention centers where detainees were basically doing everything they could to protect hidden phones, to make sure that they had a way of sending out distress calls. And as a result of that, I, for years basically, ended up receiving information from inside detention centers about what was happening. And it quickly became clear to me that this wasn't properly being documented, that even the European public weren't really aware of that. So since 2017, now close to 100,000 men, women, and children have been intercepted at sea and forced back to these detention centers. Pope Francis, among others, has compared them to concentration camps. Inside, every type of abuse you can imagine is happening: rape, torture, starvation, medical neglect, you know, different types of humiliation as well. And people are just there indefinitely. They're not charged with anything. They don't have a lawyer. Generally, the only way that you can get out is if you either agree to go on what's called a voluntary repatriation scheme funded by the EU. So you get sent back to the country you came from, and that's generally available for West Africans, people who would not be considered to come from refugee producing countries. And in Libya, there's only 9 countries that you can actually get registered as a refugee, or with the UNHCR, you know, the refugee agency, if you come from those 9 countries. And so others, their only way out is basically either, if they have a lot of money, they can sometimes pay the guards and return to traffickers or smugglers, or they can be sent back to the country they came from. And for refugees, people who have fled wars, dictatorships, you know, persecution, situations where they would be in danger if they return home, the only way out is through a very, very, very limited evacuation scheme run by the UNHCR, which your chance of getting that is basically, you know, winning the lottery. It's pretty rare. And so, yeah, the book basically documents what I realized wasn't being documented, which is the consequences of European Union migration policy. Because I interviewed Frontex, I said, you know, you're carrying out these interceptions, or I mean, effectively, because they're doing the surveillance, they're passing on the information, and they're supporting the Libyan Coast Guard. And this is a circumnavigation of international law, because a European vessel could not return people, But I asked Frontex about this, and they said that Libya is a sovereign state, so they're not monitoring what happens once people are returned. And at the same stage, Libya, I'm sure many people know, is, I mean, not really a functional state. It's run by militias. It has multiple governments. And so there isn't proper oversight. The detention centers are being run by militias. There is no registration, for example, in detention. One question that I kept asking is how many people die when they go back to detention, and nobody was counting that. There were no answers. I did some other reporting for the book, so it wasn't just based on, getting information from detention. It was also based on my own traveling. I spent time on a refugee rescue ship off the Libyan coast. And as a result of that, I actually ended up under criminal investigation for a year, which you can read about if you buy the book, because I have to be specific about how I talk about it. So I'm not going to do that here. I also went to Ethiopia, and this one is very interesting in terms of what we're talking about. So I had been hearing a lot about the smuggling routes, how it works, and the types of exploitation that happen. And it became quite clear that, I mean, as we all know here, once you crack down on borders, exploitation increases. So once this EU funding for the Libyan Coast Guard started, the smugglers and traffickers basically became more exploitative of the people who were under their control. And so instead of allowing them to cross the sea, they would keep them for up to years. Just exploiting them, torturing them for ransom, selling them between each other, charging them again and again. And there were two of the smugglers that I heard about a lot who were known, smugglers, traffickers in Libya. It's a bit, one can turn into the other. So I call them smugglers, but you could also call them traffickers. Two of them that I heard about a lot were called Kadani Habtemariam and Welid, also known as Tuwaldi Gwotam. And they actually were apprehended in Ethiopia in early 2020. And that was because of the bravery of a victim literally who had been sent back to Ethiopia through this voluntary scheme, literally saw one of them in the street and got a police officer to arrest him. And I ended up attending their trials. And for me, this was suddenly, I was thinking, this could be like one glimmer of hope, because of course, like the securitization of borders is bad, but also a lot of refugees I speak to, they don't like the top traffickers, the ones with a lot of power. They're obviously very abusive. And so it's not necessarily seen as them providing a service, whereas it might be, if with in other contexts, like these are, terrible people. And so I went to this trial. It turned out that I was the only independent observer apart from Ethiopian journalist who translated for me. And that was really shocking to me. I contacted embassies, I contacted human rights groups, UN organizations. I said, why is there no other observers in this trial? It seems to be conveying to the Ethiopians that these aren't significant people, that they shouldn't be punished. And one of them did eventually then escape. He allegedly bribed one of the police and just got out. And yeah, I really have to question whether that would have happened if there had been proper attention placed on the trial. And I basically think of that now whenever I hear the British politicians saying that they're tackling the business model of smuggling. I think, like, why couldn't you go after the actual smugglers rather than punishing the most vulnerable people who are caught up in this system? Apart from that, I traveled to Sudan. There, I reported on alleged corruption within the UN Refugee Agency. A lot of refugees said that staff were taking bribes of up to tens of thousands of dollars for resettlement, which basically meant that they didn't have faith in, the so-called legal route. First of all, it's obviously very limited the amount of people who can take advantage of it. But secondly, they said that there was corruption in it. And as a result of my investigation, UNHCR suspended resettlement, which again, I didn't necessarily agree with. I thought that also punished vulnerable people. And they conducted an anti-fraud investigation and eventually found one staff member guilty of soliciting bribes and abusing power. And I also went to Sierra Leone. That was where one of my sources who had been in a detention center ended up being sent back through the IOM scheme. And what I found there again was that people who were sent back through this scheme, it's called voluntary, but if you're in a detention center and you potentially there's a tuberculosis outbreak or something, you think you're going to die, you have no other way to get out. It's not particularly voluntary, is it? So I met him. He essentially told me he wants to go back to Libya again because he had no opportunity in Sierra Leone. There was nothing for him to do. He was really struggling. The country was very corrupt. It was very hard to live in. And being there really made me question this idea of economic migrants. We talk about refugees versus economic migrants, but Sierra Leone people would not be considered as refugees generally. But what I saw there was, extreme poverty actually constitutes a threat to life. For example, the life expectancy there, I think, is more than 25 years less than for someone in Europe. Women, it's one of the most dangerous places to give birth in the world. I think it was something like 1 in 16 women would die during childbirth, and 1 in 10 children, I think, die before their 5th birthday. And I was there during COVID, like a COVID outbreak. There were no functional ventilators in the country. So I was told by doctors if somebody needed a ventilator, they would just die. So that made me personally question what, this idea of a threat to life and what exactly constitutes that, and how we speak about economic migrants. I also looked at the efforts to have accountability, particularly there was a challenge, there was a submission to the ICC to have the EU investigated for crimes against humanity in relation to its policy against refugees and migrants. And basically the answer that I was getting there was, first of all, because it's so bureaucratic, it's very hard to figure out who are the exact people making the decisions. And in international criminal law, you need specific individuals to go after. And secondly, politically, it's not really going to happen, is it? So I know that there's been progression, that the ICC prosecutor has now said there's evidence that crimes against humanity and war crimes are taking place against refugees and migrants in Libya who are caught up in this cycle of trying to get to sea and being intercepted. But we're waiting to see how that progresses. And then I guess lastly, which is most relevant to a UK audience right now, I went to Rwanda, where evacuation scheme, basically EU funded, is using it as a transit center. And what I found there was that, so those people are actually moved on again to countries in North Africa or in Europe. And so it's different to the UK one, which is basically just send them there and there's no option afterwards. But still what I found there was it's a dictatorship. I was given accreditation, but I was told that I was only given it because they thought that I would write good things about them. And I still wasn't given access to the refugee camp. And it's just not a place where you can have proper scrutiny of what is going on. I'm even hearing now that a lot of journalists are having their accreditation denied to go now. So I think that, what from my reporting anyway, what we're seeing is like a tendency to push vulnerable people to places where there isn't oversight. And that's happening again and again. And it means that if we don't hear about what happens that's bad, like a bad thing happening to someone who is sent to Rwanda, it doesn't mean it's not happening. It means they're being sent to a place where there isn't freedom of the press or freedom of speech. And so nobody can properly look into it. Sorry, so that was a bit complicated, but I hope that people, if they're interested, you can check out the book because it's much better explained there. And yeah, I think there's a question.
There's a question of Philip for you, Sally, on your travels. What's your experience with civil society? Just people around Libya or other places you've been?
I think in Libya, there is civil society, but it's very hard to operate. It's very dangerous and hard to operate. And yeah, I think there are people at various times I've seen local groups that speak up about the right of migrants. But the problem in Libya is that they have a lot of their own things going on, so they also can be focused on that. Whereas for me, the reason why it's so important to talk about refugees and migrants in Libya is because it's our policies that are directly forcing people there. But I think for Libyan civil society groups, there's a lot of other issues concurrently, and so it makes sense that they wouldn't specifically want to look at that. I think that's all my time. So, but thank you so much for having me again, and I hope the rest goes well.
Thank you so much for that. That was absolutely brilliant, fascinating presentation. And as someone who's read the book, I really do recommend Sally's book, My Fourth Time We Drowned. It's a hard read, I think, would be a safe way to put it, but it is exceptional. Thank you so much for that. That was
Thank you too.
Really good. Okay, so next up, we've got another short video for you. And this is from Kaylee, and she's one of our support workers, but also recently going to become our engagement and development coordinator.
Hi, my name's Kaylee, and I've spent the last year and a half working as a support worker with Love146. I'm actually just about to move into a new role within the organisation, our engagement and development coordinator role. So I just wanted to take some time today to talk to you a little bit about what both of those roles entail and the direct work that we have been doing and plan to do with our young people. I have got some notes with me, so if you see me looking down, it's just because I wanted to make sure I covered everything. And then at the end, I've got something really special that I'd like to share with you all. So within the role as a support worker with Love146, a typical day is mostly spent on direct work with young people, and that direct work can vary from practical support, helping them with universal credit claims, college applications, housing needs, maybe ESOL, to some days we might be going for a walk along the beach, or a bike ride, or cooking together, or watching a show that they really enjoy. And then there are other times where they might have a higher need for some emotional support, and we might work on a small project together around confidence and self-esteem, or healthy sleep habits, anxiety, and it also might mean that there is a higher need there and we can support them to accessing further therapeutic support. Something that we did last year was joining up and meeting up with our young people for some summer trips, which was really lovely, and is something that we're planning again for this year. And with that in mind, and the new engagement and development role is actually something that we want to move towards doing more, is creating an informal space for our young people to meet. And at the start, we kind of see that looking like just a place with no real set agenda, but maybe it's we're coming together and sharing food, or going for walks, a book club, with the hope that eventually we could start some more formal and structured youth participation groups, where we can focus on social issues that affect them, and empower them to use their voices to make positive change. I personally have a really strong passion and belief in the power of the arts, and that's something else that we're hoping to develop over the course of this year and beyond. We've already had some really exciting conversations with various different theatre production companies about how we can empower our young people and share their stories in a way that's comfortable for them, and not, when we say share their stories, we don't just mean about the most traumatic parts of their life, just about them as a young person, and that those stories could be really positive, happy stories celebrating who they are now, and that's the really wonderful and exciting thing about the arts, is actually it could take us anywhere, and it's just a tool to further empower our young people, and likewise with physical art, we've got some some plans to create some physical pieces of art with them, music, drawing, whatever their passions might be, or however they feel is a comfortable way to express themselves. We want to create a space where they are able to do that. And then what we would really like to do is use some of the kind of finished pieces, whether it's theatre, art, music, to educate and engage with other organisations, other professionals, general public, anybody who would be interested in learning from our young people. So yeah, we've got a lot of plans and a lot of goals within this engagement and development area, and we really can't wait to share that progress with you all. And with that, I'd like to share a piece of creative writing that was written by one of our young people. She's incredibly talented. She writes a lot of poetry and short stories. And this is something that she wrote with other young people who have had similar experiences to her in mind. So it's called A Story for Sleeping. It is night again, silence and dark. This time should be for sleeping, but you are not sleeping. Now you are thinking about everything, but nothing to do with the night. So let me tell you these words from my heart. Maybe you are looking at the roof of the room as you listen to me. The roof that is holding you and protecting you from rain, wind, and danger from outside. I know it may not be like the house you grew up in. Try to close your eyes and you will realise you still have the same eyelids as the last time you slept safely. It is not as strange as the roof, because your home is inside of you. All the places you have been to, all the people you have met, all the songs you have heard, they affect you a bit, they change you a bit. They make you feel safe or even unsafe. But for now, in this night, no one and nothing is around you. It is only you and your home. It is time to feel safe. It is time to love yourself and be kind to it. It is night and silence is covering you. I know it feels scary, but listen for a moment to your heartbeat, to your breath. They are confirming to you that you are alive. It is your right to be safe in your home, wherever you are. Yeah, that's it. I'd love to know if anyone has any thoughts about that, or would like to discuss that maybe later when we've got some time for discussion. I think it's absolutely incredible. And she gave me permission to share this with you all as well. Thank you.
So, I mean, everything Katie said is just so important, and I mean, it's crucial what we do. Really looking forward to Katie being the engagement development coordinator, because so much we can do. This is the 10th anniversary of Love146 UK, 20th anniversary of Love146, and so much. And you listen to the poem, you listen to what's happening, the importance of different aspects, and that's what it's all about. It's about the individual different things, the positivity as well as anything else. And yeah, just thank you so much, Kaylee. That was absolutely brilliant. And we're going to try and go straight to the video we have of Nicola Kelly, who is a freelance journalist, writes for numerous different publications, but recently in The Guardian, you mentioned some fantastic work about immigration and asylum, and she's talking about what it's like to cover this, the challenges that come forward with it. So
thanks so much, Daniel. So my name is Nicola Kelly. I'm a journalist, a freelance journalist, and I tend to report on UK immigration and asylum issues for The Guardian for the most part. And I'm firstly just to say I'm so sorry I can't be there on Friday. It clashes with the first holiday I've had in 2.5 years. So I hope to catch up on some of what's discussed today. But just to say I'm really happy to contribute to this discussion. Daniel's asked me to talk a little bit about what it's like to report on these issues, on UK immigration and asylum issues. And as a sort of top line, I just say it's difficult, it's often very technical, and it's getting tougher. And I'll give you some examples of how it's getting tougher. But kind of important maybe to say, first of all, sort of preface what I'm about to say by setting out that I worked for the Home Office in their press office in 2014, which is obviously during the rollout of the hostile environment legislation. So that tends to inform a lot of my reporting on these issues. I left fairly swiftly, but I still have a lot of contacts in the department, the different arms of the department, and across the civil service. So while it didn't really feel like it at the time, there was quite a net benefit from that experience, I would hope. So just on how it's getting tougher, I'd say I speak to people really regularly. I speak to other journalists who work on this brief, the freelancers and staff, and we all agree the Home Office as a department is getting more bullish. They're getting a lot more hostile towards journalists. I'm certainly not alone in that view. And what we experience isn't a series of isolated incidents. It's something that sort of builds up a picture of a really hostile place to work and a sometimes quite toxic environment. And I'll just give you an example of that. So I worked really recently, about 3 weeks ago, I did an article about a report from the charity Doctors of the World, which was on access to healthcare and initial accommodation. And I went to Napier Barracks in Folkestone, and I spoke to some people there. We knew that it was going to be a bit of a political hotcake because Linton on Ouse in North Yorkshire, a not dissimilar setup, is due to be opened. But the report itself from Doctors of the World, there was nothing hugely sort of groundbreaking or revelatory about it. And the guys in Napier Barracks were basically saying we haven't really got decent access to healthcare, and mental health concerns were a particular issue. I went to the Home Office press office for the right to reply, which we have to do for every piece. And I set out the findings from the report that we were planning to publish. So it was sort of 5-6 bullet points of what we were planning to write, or what I'd included in my copy, and a breakdown of what the guys at Napier had told me. What ensued was 3 days of backwards and forth with the press office, basically attempting to kill the story. They said they were not willing to comment or put out a statement unless I sent them the full embargoed report before publication. We said we weren't willing to do that, and we'd set out all of the findings and included everything that we had written in the copy. They said they wouldn't provide a statement other than The Guardian hadn't provided them with enough information to comment. 2 lawyers, 3 editors, 2 sub-editors, and then eventually Reader's Editorial, which is like the complaints department at The Guardian, all got involved. It strikes me as odd that they kind of went about it like that, because what could have been a really low-key issue that just flew under the radar and like got a few retweets ended up getting a lot more traction. Ultimately, they kind of shot themselves in the foot with the way they dealt with me and with The Guardian in general. Yeah, another example is a report I did recently on migrant women and maternity care from last week. It said that women are being landed with maternity charges of up to £14,000. Again, nothing hugely new in this. Lots of people came back to say on Twitter, they told me, oh, we weren't aware of this. We thought the NHS was free at the point of use for everybody. So I was pleased to have kind of shed light on some of that. But the Home Office came back and tried to get me to reveal the name of my source and all of their details, date of birth, case number, etc. And they said it was for internal purposes only. I go back to the fact that I work for the Home Office. I know the way their processes work. I said I wasn't willing to do that. We were identifying her by her first name only, and that was all that we could tell them. Lots of phone calls, lots of emails, lots of people getting involved, seemingly quite unnecessarily, and a very time-consuming piece. But yeah, that's the sort of modus operandi. Just the last thing I'd say on dealing with the Home Office is another piece I did on a Syrian interpreter who had worked for the Foreign Office. He'd worked for the White Helmets for almost 9 years. And he'd been waiting for a decision on his asylum claim for almost 2 years, and he was suicidal. Within 4 days of publication, he'd been granted asylum, and that can't be right. That is the way the Home Office go about doing these things, and we see it time and time again. It shouldn't take an article in a newspaper or a broadcast for someone's future in this country to be determined, but that is the way it works. I regularly receive phone calls from the Home Office before publication, often at a very senior level, attempting to disrupt publication. So yeah, I would just say dealing with the Home Office is time-consuming, draining, frustrating. It's like navigating a minefield. And I can only really see it becoming more so, unfortunately. But the other side of reporting on these issues is quite different. It's speaking to contributors, and in my case, it's asylum seekers and refugees for the most part, which is often really illuminating, insightful, can be very difficult to hear their stories. They're very vulnerable, and you know, I think as journalists, we have a duty of care to these people. In general, I always anonymise my sources to protect their identities. In some instances, people choose to waive anonymity. The piece I did last week, she chose to just have her first name published. But if someone goes on the record, we have a duty of care to those people to set out what the ramifications might be after publication, and just to keep a really open door policy, a kind of open phone policy in my case, yeah, just to set out what the consequences might be after a piece is published, because sometimes that can come as a bit of a surprise, and we need to ensure that contributors have support in place from charities, solicitors and others. But a really important lesson for us is knowing when not to go ahead with a piece, because it just poses too many risks to contributors, to their loved ones and others. And a subject I'm really passionate about is ethics on those issues. So just ensuring that there's a code of ethics for journalists. We see very often journalists doing things that are quite morally dubious, and journalistically certainly dubious. I'm working with a guy, I'm working with Oxford University at the moment on a guide about ethical migration reporting, and I think there should be something a bit more concrete on these issues. But as I say, I think mistakes do get made, and in part that's because there's only maybe up to around 10, I mean a handful certainly, of journalists who work on these issues consistently, who work on these issues day in, day out. Sometimes people lack background knowledge, experience, or understanding, and it's a really fast-moving brief. It's really complex, and it's complex for a reason. The Home Office make it that way for a reason, because it gives them wiggle room. It tends to build quite a confusing picture, and ultimately, as with everything with the Home Office, it aims to deter people from coming here. And I'd say we've seen with the Rwanda plans, we've seen that one Home Affairs correspondent, one Social Affairs correspondent on staff in the big newsrooms isn't really enough. All of a sudden, editors see, you know, these marginalised people or people who've been pushed to the margins on purpose. They see that they're making headlines, and they're suddenly sort of parachute in these big names, they're star reporters, again, often without any context, background or detailed understanding of the issues. So yeah, I'd argue that it shouldn't be sort of left to freelancers or to the handful of staff reporters to work consistently across this brief. Just a note as well, I thought, on what editors and newsrooms want, and people ask this quite a lot. Editors often say to me, we think there's some compassion fatigue or sort of migration fatigue, refugee fatigue among readers and listeners and viewers. And that affects how much resource they put behind a piece. And it might mean that we stay on an issue for a shorter period of time than it merits or than we'd like to. They're quite time-consuming pieces for editors and for teams, as I've already set out. So yeah, I think sometimes they don't want to have to break down the legal jargon. They don't want to have to sort of unpick these really knotty, complex issues and sort of find a way to make them digestible for readers or viewers or listeners. So sometimes there's a bit of a lack of appetite among editors, which is a real shame. But for me, as a freelancer, I think the most important thing and the best way to go about it is to always go back to the voice of the contributor, to the voice of the asylum seeker and the refugee, because there's two types of stories. There's policy stories and there's people stories. And I think every story should be a mixture of the two. Personal stories always have the most impacts, they get the most traction. And where the Home Office tries to strip away people's humanity, as we see them do all the time, I think it's our job, and it's really important that we give that humanity back and say, look, here's a person whose life's basically been destroyed by this piece of legislation, and it's not just about policy, it's about people, and there are real lives at stake. So with all of that in mind, which feels quite a cynical, journalists are notoriously quite cynical, but I am an optimist, and just to end on a bit of a hopeful note. I think at the moment what we're seeing is really interesting. More than ever, people are willing to break ranks. Home Office officials, border force officials, different parts across immigration functions are willing to speak out, and they're becoming more and more vocal. The UNHCR intervening in UK policy, maybe intervention is the wrong word, PCS on the Rwanda plans, it's really unprecedented and it's extraordinary and it gives me heart. And I think the work of charities and so-called lefty lawyers is absolutely phenomenal. And we as journalists can do a huge amount to support that work. Because what journalists do well, and have always done well, and I hope will continue to do well, is to sort of take the mood music among the general public. We sort of, or I see our role as sort of sitting between the general public and those we speak to and our contributors and sort of the authorities, charities, lawyers, activists and others, and speaking to those who are directly affected. And we play a crucial role, probably now more than ever, in holding government to account. And it's so, so important that we continue to do that.
That was Nicola Kelly, and of the points she made, several, I mean, all of them are important, but the point that when people are in the media, the Home Office reacts very, very quickly. They do not like negative press because they like to control the story, as everybody does. And we see it time and again of cases which dragged on, issues, and as soon as they hit the media, suddenly things happen and suddenly things move. And that provides us with an opportunity because they don't like criticism. They're getting criticism now from the public, but they're also getting it, as Nicola said, from within. The Border Force Union, effectively, Immigration Enforcement Union, have spoken out. Home Office officials are speaking out. The Rwanda deal has horrified so many people with what it can do. It gives an opportunity to find new ways, find new people we can speak to, find new interests, and that's something to look for. I mean, it's always been the thing of, well, how do we make change? And we're seeing that change happen because you could argue by its own sort of failings, its own misdeeds. The government has created this atmosphere where even those working within it, who've worked in it for years, are saying, this is too far, this is too much. And that creates an opportunity. And it creates an opportunity we can use to help protect those who need it, to protect the vulnerable, to protect trafficking survivors. And that's something I think we should be positive about. That's something we should really hold on to, is there are these opportunities, there are these chances. And the Guide to Ethical Journalism is something that we're also working on. I'm working on, or I've contributed to and spoken to them about. If we can move on that, so that we do see some hideous reports, we see a lot of terrible reports on refugees, on trafficking, ways that put vulnerable people down as being criminals or gives away their identities and details, puts them at risk. If we can get journalists to realise and start to come round to the fact that we're talking about human beings, and we need to focus on that. Behind every statistic that you see, behind every number that is thrown out there in the press or by politicians, are people. And once we start seeing that, and once the majority of people in the country start seeing, then we have this opportunity to really engage with them. So it goes back to what's been said previously about making sure that their voices are heard, people's voices, because people like me can talk and talk and talk, but once you actually have the people's who are affected voices being heard, then people can engage, because otherwise they see numbers, they see statistics, they see 453 channel crossings, which is a very small number of people when you actually think about it. So that's something to hold on to, and I hope that's something that everyone will hold on to. Now, coming up next, we have John Stokes. John is joined on as a foster parent, and I'm hoping you're there, John. And I'm going to pass over to you if you're okay for that.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
All good. Sorry, just get seated right. Right. Well, I'm a foster carer. Over 30 years of caring, mostly for boys until recently. And in the last 6 or 7 of those years, since 2015, I've been caring for some Albanian unaccompanied asylum seekers. So what I'm going to talk about today is to take, in particular, one of them as an example to sort of explain the journey that they go through. And I don't just mean a journey from their country to here, I mean the journey of their life and what happens to them. So with one lad of mine, he basically, at the age of 11, was in the capital of Tirana. His father had problems with gambling, with drink, and ran up debts. And Samit, who's the young lad, he basically had to go out on the streets and beg for money. His father expected him to do that because his father didn't work. And from the age of 11, he was basically on the street begging. If he didn't take enough home, it wouldn't be nice for him. And that was his life until at the age of just about 16, and his father then took him to Brussels. Now, we don't know exactly what the purpose of him taking to Brussels was, because when they got there, Samit managed to basically escape from his father. But what I can say is Brussels is one of the capitals of trafficking, particularly young boys. You get a lot of paedophiles, it's basically a centre. I'm not saying that's necessarily what his father was going to do, but that's one of the things that happens in Brussels. A lot of boys have terrible experiences there. Well, Samit ran away, got to England. So he arrives in the UK. Now, the journey of you've got a journey that's traumatic because he's been taken away from the rest of his family. He doesn't know his future, and he arrives here, speaks English, but not well. So what happens then is he comes into the care of social services. Now, social services, as I've seen recently, in London, probably they're much more on the ball because they get a lot more young migrants coming through, unaccompanied asylum seekers. I live in Bristol, so out in the west of England. And what happened with Samit was, first of all, he went into a children's home. It's often the case because all they want is to find a bed. Somebody pops up, literally, and they have to find a bed. If they can find a carer, they'll do it. If not, they find a children's home. So he went into a children's home, and that wasn't good for him because there's I think with a lot of the young children in care, having looked after them for so many years, I know that you get into the system, the kids kind of know how to work the system. And you get a lot of negatives. unfortunately, and a lot of bullying, which Samit suffered. He was given a bike, then he was beaten up and it was stolen. So it wasn't a good time, and he spent a few months there. And then I'd already fostered another Albanian lad a couple of years earlier and had won his case. Fortunately, he'd been refused, but on appeal we won his case, and he basically went to college and did everything right and became a chef, and now is a head chef, business director at 23 years old. But getting back to Samit, what happened is he came to me. Now it was better for him because he had somebody who spoke the same language from the same culture. So some would say perhaps it's a bit of potluck which carer you go to, because there's a lot of great carers, but I've also met a lot of youngsters, particularly Albanian youngsters, who've had bad experiences. And that is because the carers are not trained necessarily, they might be in some areas, but not necessarily trained to look after migrants. When I started caring, I looked after car thieves, because the first one was a car thief. I was successful with that one, so they gave me another car thief and another car thief, and that's kind of how it works. So when Ali came, who was the first Albanian lad, because I was successful with him, then Samit, it was a good reason for Samit to be placed with me. So Samit arrived, and he went to school for a little while. His English was poor, but passable. Managed to get through school without any great problem, and the following year went to college. So he basically excelled at college. He wanted to be a carpenter. He became the best person on his course. Didn't tell me anything about this. I didn't get initially a lot of feedback from college, and I just assumed he was kind of doing okay. But when I went to college, they just said, oh, he's exceptional. He's got a real talent for this. Not only that, even despite his not so great English, which was improving, he was helping other youngsters. So he really settled in. Now, at that time, he'd become 18. And these youngsters, when they become 18, then they're allowed to stay until they're 18. Like everybody else that I seem to have heard of, he then gets refused. Albanians in particular figure very highly in the number of unaccompanied asylum seekers that come to the UK, and extremely high in the numbers that get refused, because there's a lot of preconceptions about Albanians. The Home Office have a very dim view, like not the only country, but a lot of countries don't treat Albanians with equal measure of other youngsters. So we had to start the court process. So we go to court, like I said, with Ali. We'd won on the first appeal. We actually won the case. Maybe we were lucky. Maybe we got a good judge. We went to court with Samit, and we didn't. And that was a really bad time, because Samit also has been diagnosed with severe PTSD from the trauma, and that's another aspect of these children, because they're very traumatized. Just what I've said about his life up to that point, he's had the trauma of the home life, he's had the trauma of the journey, he's had the trauma of coming here, settling into a new culture, and then the trauma begins with the Home Office. So we then decided we'd have to fight this. Now, it's not easy these days. Even in the couple of years between Ali and Samit, the situation changed with legal aid. So I had to raise money. So I started a GoFundMe. And I've some experience with working with the press. It was interesting, the last speaker talking about the press. And I've worked a lot with the press. And I know if they pick up a story then and run with it, it helps a lot. And it was an awful coincidence that just when I sent a press release out to the papers about Samit's story and him fighting for his, basically fighting for his future life, the awful news came through of the migrants in the lorry a few years ago that died. As the press works, obviously they're looking for a story. Mine happened to land on the desk at the right time. So it really kind of put Samit's story right out there. We didn't use the surname, except unfortunately one newspaper, perhaps I shouldn't mention, but you won't find it in Liverpool, should we say, decided to print his full name. They found it out and put his full name in. That put him under threat because traffickers keep an eye on the youngsters they bring over. They bring youngsters to the UK, they put them in drugs farms. You know, I've known somebody who went to a drugs farm in South Wales, and there was 40 or 50 young Albanians in there at that time, or mostly Albanians anyway. And what they do is after the drugs farm, they release them and they come up to social services and they go through this process. And when they get through the process and they get rejected, they either fight it, and it takes funds to fight it, or they run away. And many, and we're not just talking about Albanians, we're talking about various nationalities, will run away and go underground. When they go underground, they often will get picked up by sometimes the same traffickers that brought them here in the first place. And they will basically end up working for enslaved conditions. They might be housed in terrible conditions. They might have to work for a pittance. They will never be flagged up on anything because they can't get driver licenses. They can't get housing. They can't do anything because they're illegal. At that point, they've become illegal and they've gone underground. And I've met quite a few of these youngsters, and it's awful lives. And Samit, that's what he's faced. And fortunately, although it was a disastrous story that sort of pushed his story into the papers, it meant the campaign took off and we got national publicity, international publicity, even went as far as getting noticed by United Nations and things. So we fought the campaign. Now, then we reached 400,000 signatures. And as the previous speaker was saying, that can help a lot. And we really got the impression the Home Office were wavering. But unfortunately, the pandemic kicked in. The momentum was lost. And for the last 2 and whatever years, we've been going through the court system of going through one appeal after another, and trying to keep his appeal alive, because as long as his appeal is alive, then he cannot be deported. And that is what's facing him every day of his life at the moment. His college, he finished because he'd done everything he could. The other young people on his course went to do whatever they had to do. You know, some of them qualified and became carpenters or builders, and some of them went off to other jobs, but their lives moved on. Samit's didn't. His couldn't move on. He's not allowed to work. He's never been allowed to work. Like most of these young people that come, he had no right to work. So for most of the last 3 years, Samit has been able to do nothing except sit and wait for the next appeal, which is often 4-6 months down the line. So it's, I know a lot of youngsters, Albanian youngsters in London have done a report on what it's like to live your life basically frozen. You really can't move on with it. And that's our legal system. You know, we have a great barrister, we're lucky, because there is a variation in that. When they come to a foster care, I've had to sort that out rather than social services. They would have found one, but a social worker wouldn't have had time to pursue the case. So I've been lucky. I've managed to get publicity. I've managed to raise funds to pay for the legal expenses and other expenses. It's kept Samit going for the last 3 years, but there's no end to it. So next year I'll be 70. I possibly would have retired by now, but at the moment I don't have that option because I need to keep going, because Samit needs to keep going. We don't have that option on stopping. So we basically will have to go through the courts in order to avoid Samit getting deported. And if he gets deported, it's what happens to him, because I've been to Albania recently. I'm going again in a few months. I've spoken to a lot of people. I've spoken to media people in Albania and people on the ground there. The situation that the Home Office give for Albania, it's termed a safe country because there's not a war in there. Well, it may be safe from bombs and rockets, but it's not safe from abuse. Samit had a life of abuse. Youngsters that go back to Albania generally get re-trafficked because they are not provided with housing. The Albanian government will say they are. Unfortunately, we're not the only people with government that don't tell the truth, because Albania wants to get into the EU. And to get in the EU, they have to satisfy certain things. So for instance, like the health service, there's no real effective mental health service for young people in Albania. Inherent problem with that is that particularly the young men, which is a lot of what come, is in Albanian culture, it's not seen right to admit to mental health problems. So youngsters are loath to do it, but even if they did, there's not the facility there to do it. So youngsters like Samit with PTSD going back will be a second-class citizen in a country that is already very poor. Now you can go to Albania, as I have, I said, and there's a lovely place. And I remember the words of a youngster I spoke to there, and I said, you know, it's nice. And he said, you have to remember, it's a nice place to visit. It's not a nice place to live if you're a young person, because the future is not good. There's very few jobs. You have to basically pay to get a job there. There's so much competition. So the outlook is really bad. And the chances are that Samit would be re-trafficked like the other youngsters. So all told, it's a really, really terrible situation. And like I said, the Home Office, I've worked, as I said, for over 30 years with social services fostering young people. The basic purpose of my job is to protect youngsters, to give them a safe place to live, to try and help them into adulthood. Well, first of all, since 18, and Samit will be 21 in September, he's had no adulthood because he can't do the things that other adults do. He doesn't have any income. He has to rely on little bits. There's no work available, and there's no real social life because he's lost the friends. They've moved on. He's left behind. So it's really looking at what else we can do. You know, it's difficult to keep support going. Like I said, we've got massive 400,000 people support us, and that has not convinced the Home Office to back that. So all we can do is keep going, hope that we can get some sort of life. But as I said, if he goes back to Albania, there's no future for him there. He will just become the victim of traffickers again. And whatever the Home Office say, after, like I was saying, my job is to care for young people, is to help them. Everybody that works in social services has a duty to protect youngsters. Yet, what I didn't realize was that with all the partners we have, so you have teachers, you have social workers, and you have all the other people involved, they all have one priority, and that is to work and help the young people. But what's happened with young people coming into the country is there's an awful thing called the Home Office, and they are working against us. I could only compare it with, as a foster carer, I've worked with many traumatized and abused young people, and their abusers, they've been taken off their abusers and put into care. I have yet to meet an abuser who does as much damage as the Home Office does to young people, because they destroy them. They totally destroy their lives. And however bad it is for young people that have been abused in this country, there are social services, there are mental health services. Not everybody gets the service they need, but they are there. There is a structure there. And for young people like Samit, there's basically nothing. There's no support. So the Home Office have become the ogre, if you like. There is no compassion to have to tell him repeatedly to raise his hopes that things will get better. He's had some friends who have succeeded and some who have failed. So he knows what the outcome is in both cases. If it came to it, he'd probably run at some point if he lost all his appeals, because what other option? He terrified of going back to Albania because his father has great debts, and those debts will be taken. In Albanian society, if your father has debts, you as the son take over those debts. So if he returned to Albania, he would not be safe. The Home Office said placed somewhere, could be placed 100 miles away. Albania is a small country, but you go to Albania and you go into, say, a social security office and say, or housing office in any part of the country and pass it over, then somebody will tell you where a certain person lived. You cannot hide in Albania. There's no hiding place at all. So there'd be no hiding place for him if he gets back. So that's what these youngsters, that's just one example of what youngsters have to cope with. And all we can do is looking at ways to help. It's becoming increasingly difficult. Over the 5 or 6 years I've been working, the hostile environment has got worse and worse. And we really can't see any real light at the end of the tunnel in that one. There is light at the end of the tunnel is I've seen organizations like Love146 and other organizations that, and like the lawyers and the barristers that campaigned for the people going on the plane and got that result, those people are beginning to get together. And I echo, I think what the previous speaker was saying about within the Home Office, obviously there's people that are not happy with how things are going. And all I can say is I think as human beings, we have to work together. People hopefully will begin to understand the traffic is not a threat. Using my older lad as an example, like I said, he's a head chef now. Next year to get him his own restaurant. He loves the fact that he's earning money, he's paying taxes, he will be employing people, he will be contributing to the good of this country. And that's his future. And it's so sad that the other youngsters don't get that. In my opinion, all youngsters that come as children should get the protection that our children get. But youngsters like Summit don't. The Home Office just don't give them that protection. All the years I've been working, anybody that did that, what they do to young people would be prosecuted, but they are the Home Office, they're above the law. And sadly, that seems to be how it is. So sort of finish on a positive note, it's to say that our people like Love146 that are really working hard to change things. And the more of us that join in with people like that, the more chance we've got of making a difference. So whether it's signing a petition for Summit or helping one of these charities, everyone can play a part. And I just want more and more people to get involved. And, you know, with the previous speaker, it's getting things to the press. It's making these cases known, because only when we educate people, we realize that migrants are not a threat to the, you know, at the moment, the government is a threat. They're certainly not a threat to traffickers, because I've yet to see a trafficker that's suffering because of this hostile environment. They're actually doing much better, and they will continue to do better until we address a real problem, which is we need to take these youngsters in, particularly the youngsters, we need to take them in and give them indefinite leave to remain. And those that have left and gone underground, I believe we should really make an amnesty. It's been done before in the past by other governments, and I really think our government, maybe being a bit optimistic with this government, but a government should give an amnesty to these young people, because there's so many young people working underground in slave labor that could be earning and paying taxes to this country, and that's where our country would benefit. So that's about it. I don't know if anybody's got any questions.
I don't know. Does anyone have any questions, John? John, that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for everything you do. You really are an inspiration, and really everything you do is absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Just to say, you know, just following on from what John said about almost this two-tier system that we see in this country of protection, where young people who've been trafficked or refugees are treated in completely different ways. They can be put in hotels, or they're denied what they need. And it's where foster carers like John come in, are providing that lifeline, that hope, that sense of family and support that we all take for granted. And so many are just refused. So, no, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, next up, we're going to, again, play another video for you. Please bear with us. And this is of our founder, Rob Morris from the US. He set up Love146 initially in the US, and then we started up in, as I said, in the UK 10 years ago this year.
Well, if you're like me, there are days where it just seems too much. You know, I heard somebody recently use the word relentless. They said, oh my gosh, it just feels like a barrage. Everything just feels so relentless. And that word, something struck me when I heard that word. And so I actually looked it up, and the word relentless is defined showing or promising no abatement of intensity, strength, or pace, unrelenting. And when I think about those days where it feels like too much, it's usually feels like when the relentlessness is connected to suffering. Suffering in the world feels relentless. Violence, sickness, anger, hate, relentless division at times, relentless injustice, relentless cynicism, relentless bad news. But I don't think that's the whole story. I think there's another side to relentlessness or unrelenting, and it's the positive side of things. And I think about kids that are in our care. I think about our Love146 staff. I think about you as supporters of Love146, and that's when I think about the other side of relentless. And that side looks like relentless hope, relentless generosity, relentless tenacity, relentless advocacy, relentless compassion, a relentless commitment to protect and care for children. I'm going to say something that probably few charities would tell you, especially this time of the year, and it is this: don't give. And what I mean by that is don't give in to despair. Don't give up the fight, and don't give way to the cynics. Instead, give your energy, your time, your talent, give your heart, and together we'll create a safer world for children. Thank you for caring.
Hopefully that just resonates. Be relentless, because what we're seeing with opposition to protection is relentless. You just need to see the amount of stuff coming out of the government, the language that's used, language which children see, will affect them. So we all need to be relentless on this, because if we're not, then we're not going to succeed. And we need to, because this is about providing protection to those who need it. Now, a lot of what you've heard today has been heartbreaking. It's been hard. It's a very difficult topic. It's a topic that, when we envisaged this event, it was a positive festival type event, and it's actually quite hard to turn trafficking into a positive thing to talk about. But there are ways to look at this positively, and it's not about what's happening now. It's what we can do, how we can act, how we can react to things. And we need to be relentless for that. And I think that's something we can take away as well. I keep saying we take away stuff. There's a lot to take away from today. We do, by the way, I will stress, have a music section coming up a little later. Give you a bit of a break before we have the debate, run through everything else that's been said. So we do have that to try and liven this up, to be that positive, because we need positivity right now. We need it more than ever before. And if we are positive to each other, and we are positive outlook that we can achieve things, then we can succeed, and we can provide that protection. We can end child trafficking. We can create policies, benefit people, support children. We can abolish this idea of a two-tiered child protection system and ensure that all children, as they're guaranteed in law, are treated equally, because a child doesn't stop being a child no matter where they come from. They're still a child. And that's something that we can take away from this, and we can be positive about, that we can succeed on that. Now, our final speaker of the day is Miranda Butler. Miranda is barrister at Landmark Chambers, and I'm hoping you are there. I can pass over to you if that's okay.
I am indeed here. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. And thank you, John, also for sharing your experience. I'm always in awe of the amazing work you do and the support you show to such vulnerable young people. It's always wonderful to hear about your experiences. So what I'm going to talk about today is my experience of representing victims of trafficking, including child victims. And I'm really grateful to Love146 for framing this event as they have, because I know if you'd spoken to me on Monday, if you'd spoken to most people who work in the immigration sector on Monday, we were not feeling very positive. We were despairing, depressed, upset, confused by the decisions we were seeing from the High Court, the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court. And it was, I'm sure other speakers have spoken of their elation and encouragement at the decision of the Strasbourg Court, which resulted in nobody being sent on a plane to Rwanda on Tuesday. And this is an incredibly difficult time to be doing the work that I do and that many wonderful lawyers and advocates do as well. But there is still reason to hope, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to reflect on that here. Firstly, I am constantly inspired by the solidarity and support I see both across the legal profession amongst so-called left-wing lawyers, even as they come under attack. My colleagues who are people of colour have come under appalling racist attack. Firms I work with have had people show up at their door threatening violence. That is a terrifying context to be working in, even without changes in the law that make the work that we do harder every day. But instead of giving in what I see as the most fabulous commitment from smart people who could be earning 10 times as much doing commercial law or something boring like that, but people who are completely committed to what they do and want to spend their lives using their privilege to help people who don't have that type of privilege. And I see that solidarity and support in, of course, the broader community of NGOs, organisations, groups like Love146 and the incredible work they do, but perhaps even more excitingly, across wider spectrums of society. You know, we have incredible people like John who go out of their way to open up their lives and homes to vulnerable people, but many people who aren't quite as inspirational as him have opened up their homes and their hearts to the people of Ukraine recently. And it has been a beautiful thing to see so many people finally seeing refugees and migrants as neighbours and people in need of support and integration rather than a hostile threat that's to be counted, detained, marginalised and ideally removed. I'm very clear-eyed about the fact that there are large parts of our society that don't share those views, but I do believe that, having seen the statistics on support for the Rwanda scheme being at about 30%, there being widespread support for Ukrainian refugees throughout the UK, I think there are good reasons to believe that the UK is more generous, more supportive and more welcoming than our laws are or than our government would have us believe. And I thought it might be interesting to draw an example from my own casework. I often talk about the fact that alongside the people I've just mentioned, a lot of people who really inspire me are my clients, because I sit there thinking I work hard and then I'll read my client's witness statement, I'll meet them, I'll talk to them about their lives, and suddenly I'll realise that what I thought was a hard day is no such thing at all. And the strength and resilience, the relentless endurance of people like the victims and survivors of trafficking that I've represented is quite eye-opening. And I'm very grateful to have the chance to work with and learn from those people who have life experiences that I can barely imagine, even though I immerse myself in them every day. So next week, I'm in the Court of Appeal representing a young woman called LM. LM is from Albania, and in and around Europe and elsewhere, she was the victim of appalling sexual exploitation. And LM came to the UK and she was initially too scared to identify herself to the authorities. She has PTSD and very complex mental health problems as a result of all the abuse that she suffered. She fell into the hands of an abusive partner in the UK, and having escaped physical violence from him one night, she was picked up and taken to a police station where she claimed that she claimed truly that she'd been the victim of trafficking outside the UK, but she also said that she'd been trafficked in the UK because she was scared, traumatized, and desperate not to be returned to a position of trafficking. On the basis of that incorrect account, the government rejected her as a victim of trafficking, despite extensive expert evidence, medical evidence, country evidence, background evidence, evidence from her family, all about what she'd been through. And we fought that case to the High Court, and we lost in the High Court. And LM was terrified to bring the case, but she has pursued it because she knows it's the right thing to do. She was heartbroken by the initial refusal, by being knocked back in the High Court, but she's keeping fighting, and we're keeping fighting with her. And I very much hope that we will win next week, and I will do my best to make sure that happens. But what encourages me is that there are so many people, from people as vulnerable and traumatized as LM to some of the cleverest and most privileged QCs one can imagine, all fighting to make sure that survivors of trafficking are safe and are protected. And to pick up on Bob Morris's concept of relentlessness, I think that that perfectly encapsulates that sense of resilience in the face of what sometimes feel like overwhelming odds. I also have been reflecting today a little bit about the hope that I get from how trafficking has developed over time in the UK, particularly trafficking law and the framework and the tools that I and people like me have to challenge it as lawyers. In 2009, we didn't really have a framework for trafficking. We didn't have an NRM, people weren't being referred in. And even after that, after we ratified the European Convention on Action Against Trafficking, still very few people were being referred into the national referral mechanism, being identified as victims and being supported as victims. And some people point to the significant rise in the number of people being identified as victims of trafficking since that time, and argue that either these claims are fallacious, which we know is not the case, or they argue that that's a concerning sign that trafficking is clearly growing in the UK. And whilst the latter point is, of course, cause for concern, that's not how I read the statistics. I actually, bizarrely, read the rise in statistics as quite a good thing, because I think what they show is that more people in this country, more professionals, more people working on behalf of the state in the third sector, more lawyers, more public servants, more members of the public know about trafficking and are able to do something about it. And therefore, more children, more adults, more British people, more people from other countries are being identified and hopefully protected and supported as victims of trafficking. And if you look at the case law, as I will do, because that's my job, you see a commitment to pushing the law for all it's worth, to finding new tools to protect people. Just this year, we've had a significant extension of discretionary leave for victims of trafficking who have an outstanding asylum claim based on the fact of their trafficking. There have, of course, been setbacks along the road, but what we can be grateful for is that resilient and relentless effort of people to use the tools we have, to learn from them, and to apply them in new contexts. And that's one of the reasons why the government likes to shout and claim about abuse, because these tactics are working. One of the reasons why lots of people get pulled off not only flights to Rwanda, but deportation flights to other countries is because they are identified as victims of trafficking, and that constitutes a barrier to their removal in most cases. And those tactics are ones that, of course, face opposition and, of course, face challenge, but we've managed to develop them over time, and we will continue to respond to the emerging threats. I'm conscious about the reality of those threats. I am not pretending that the Nationality and Borders Act is going to make anyone's life easier. I'm not pretending that its changes both to protections for victims of trafficking and around age assessment for children are going to be anything other than harmful for a large number of individuals. However, I think that we have shown over, well, let's just say since 2009, I could choose other dates, but we have shown over those 13 years a real ability to adapt, to use the tools at our disposal, and to push for greater protection for vulnerable people, and to do that successfully, even in the face of real adversity. And I think we will do that in the face of this act. One of the things that gives me hope in that context is today we've had yet another threat to the Human Rights Act, something that we've fought off time and time again, but here it comes once again. We're being told that we're going to repeal the Human Rights Act and replace it with something that makes sure we don't have to listen to Strasbourg. So I could bang on in my boring legal way and explain why that actually won't work and why it's legally incoherent as a proposal. But I think what's perhaps more interesting is the concession behind it. Even this government, with its consistent and I might say relentless attacks on human rights, on the Human Rights Act, on European judges and on the Strasbourg Court, are not going so far as to repeal the convention. They know they can't, they know there are numerous barriers to that, not least the fact that it's protected via the Good Friday Agreement. But that means that we have all of the tools within that beautiful, generous toolkit. And there's more work we can do in that. As a lawyer, I know that Strasbourg is often the site of legal creativity and the growth and extension of rights. The European Convention on Action Against Trafficking, which contains a lot of the best substantive protections for victims of trafficking, particularly around support, around residence, and around non-punishment, whilst it's not an immediate and direct part of our law, is something that the Strasbourg Court consistently follows. So I'm encouraged when I hear suggestions that we will be kicking out the trafficking directive and we don't have to listen to what the European Convention says. I'm encouraged that we still have the protections of the ECHR and we will continue to have those in the future, and that there are smart, able, committed people across my sector and many others who are going to push to make those legal principles real and concrete for people. I appreciate you've been listening to lots of people, so I'm not going to speak for much longer, but when I was thinking about what I was going to say, perhaps unsurprisingly, as an absolute committed nerd, I thought of a really lovely quote from The Lord of the Rings that I adore, and that I've been thinking about a lot recently when I've been feeling despairing and distressed about all of the challenges that we face. And it's what Frodo says to Gandalf. He says, "I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had happened." To which Gandalf says, "So do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us." And that was something written by someone who had lived through 2 world wars. We have faced adversity before. We will continue to face adversity again, but I'm hugely grateful to be surrounded by people who are fighting it in a relentless way. People with lived experience, people with enormous professional skill, people with commitment and enthusiasm and compassion. And thank you, Love146 and everyone here for being part of that.
Thank you so much, Ron, and absolutely everything you say. Thank you. There is positivity out there, and there's ways to look at this, and I think that is absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
We're going to come to a sort of debate section. This is going to be the interactive section as well. So hopefully people will have questions and you can join in, and we're going to try and go through what we've talked about today and look at what we can do all together to, again, keep going, keep being relentless. First off, though, we do have a music section. This is meant to be a positive way to do this and give people a bit of a break so you can have a think through what you've heard today and have a think through what you'd like to ask or what you'd like to talk about. So we're going to run that, and then we'll be back for the end with a going through and hopefully answering questions and talk about what next steps we can take.
Hello, hello, hello. Hello. Oh, a bit of tape. Hope you're having fun in your thing. I think I'm here for some light relief from the monstrously heavy subjects with which you are grappling. So welcome to the Billy Shinbone Show with me, Billy Shinbone. See if I can. can see you, strangely, although I can't hear you. Even though this isn't live, I can see you. This is Glastonbury, after all. So, well, in the absence of a light show, I thought I would wear a brightly coloured Hawaiian shirt. It's also a lovely sunny day, and I thought this depicts the beautiful Hawaiian idyll of the huts, the palm trees, the sunsets, the beaches, that kind of thing. So you can enjoy that before global warming removes half of the Hawaiian islands and turns them into a sort of monstrous desert islands in the middle of the Pacific. Hold on. With that in mind, I thought, oh, I've not played this for a while, a Hawaiian steel guitar. In fact, I've not played any of these songs for ages because, well, things happened. So for about 2.5 years, I've not performed doing this. And so when Dan said, do you fancy doing that? I thought, okay. Yes, I can do it at home. I'll have a go. I'll pre-record it. But I'm doing it all in one go. So if anything goes wrong, you still have the precarious nature of a genuine live event, which real-time calamity can take place. And speaking of real-time calamity, I thought, inspired by my Hawaiian shirt, I thought, well, the Hawaiians, they got the shirts, the pizzas, guitars and everything. So I'll play an old Hawaiian type tune from an album by Flip Romp, which is a band I play in very occasionally, and it's about 20 years old, this tune. It's called Skeletons on Holiday, and I will try to get it right, but I've not performed this for 3 years, I don't think, so let's give it a go. Interesting fact. You'll be aware of at the beginning of Looney Tunes, the man that played that, I think he's called Freddie Tavares, is the same man that designed the body shape of the Fender Stratocaster. So 2 amazing contributions to 20th century culture from Freddie Tavares, and the Stratocaster. There we go. Interesting fact again. Right, let's see what happens if I... well, there's going to be some noises, but we can live with that. Now, you might see there's a banjo behind me, and I tuned it just before I started doing this, but it's a very hot day, so the chances of it still being in tune are slim, but we'll give it a go. I hope you like the footwear. These are shoes of great stomping authority. I wear these for, you can give everything a beefy, well, it turns the everyday stamp into a very musical stomp, and I think the change of vowel there is the important thing about what is musical and what is not. I think that's as close as... That's about as close as we'll get, I think. Right, a song about a work-life balance. This song is not a recorded song yet, I don't think, and the song I finished with I think is not recorded. Oh, loose. There we are. The precarious nature of live music. Look, a waggly wobbly thing. Let's hope that won't spoil your enjoyment. So I crave your indulgence for all these events. The first song that I played, Old Brown Shed, is on the Billy Shinbone Show album, which you can stream or even purchase if you wish, but this song is not. Sometimes you just gotta have some fun. Sometimes you just gotta have some fun. You've been running around trying to get stuff done. And sometimes you just gotta have some sometimes you just gotta get stuff done. And sometimes you just gotta get stuff done. You've been running around having way too much fun. And sometimes you just gotta get stuff done. That's right. Sometimes you just gotta have some fun. Sometimes you just gotta have some fun. Sometimes you just gotta have some fun. Sometimes you just gotta rein it on in. Sometimes you just gotta rein it on in. You're flying too much sail in a dangerous wind. So rein it on, rein it on, rein it on, hold it on. Sometimes you just gotta let it all out. And sometimes you just gotta let it all out. You better die of daring than to die of doubt. And so let it all, 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 let it all out. Sometimes you just gotta have some fun. Sometimes you just gotta have some fun. Sometimes you just gotta have some fun. Oh, sometimes. Sometimes you just gotta have some fun. 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 Loud, aren't they, banjos? So the only person that isn't aware of how loud a banjo is the person that's playing it, because it's right behind me, whilst it's going right towards you. Well, I say you, the tiny little smartphone microphone that is helping us to share this experience. So here we go. Right, we survived that. Now, I told you I was in Glastonbury, and I live next door to Dan and Caroline, our lovely neighbours, and you may be aware that Glastonbury is the home of all kind of magical, mystical nonsense, and but one of the good things about it is that through years of careful spiritual devotion on Glastonbury tour, I've learnt the trick to tune my guitar from the open G tuning that I was in to the open D tuning just by the power of my mind. So check this out. Concentrating very hard now. Yeah, nearly there. Oh, a bit of a problem with my B string. Here we are. Look at this. That is the power of Glastonbury for you. So do come and flock in your thousands and support the many small businesses who depend upon people coming and spending money on wonderful crystals and things like that. I'm not sure if this song's even got a name. This is another new song. It's not that new, played it before. Right. And I might get it cataclysmically wrong, so we'll see. We'll have to see. I'll forget some of it. Julius Caesar is mentioned in it at some point. He represents, I think, ambitious emperors, shall we say, of the world and of history and of today. And there's a lot of them. so bold from the bliss, and I begged you to marry me please. Though I have not a ring, I am down on my knees. And maybe I'm foolish, and maybe I'm vain. Well, so I admit and so I remain. But my heart is on fire and aspires to attain to wake up beside you again and again, again and again, again and again. And we're all so foolish, and we're all so vain. Nothing lasts forever, that's time's only refrain. But we dream that we can live without stumble and pain. And we fall down and we stand up, we fall down and we stand up, we fall down and stand up again and again, again and again, again and again and again and again and again. Thank you very much. Hope you have a good rest of your day and hope it all goes well. Ta.
So that was Billy Zimmerman, and I hope that's given everyone time to think about questions and about solutions, what we can all do together. So we've got Kaylee and myself will lead this. Kelly's there, excellent. And yeah, so does anyone have any questions? Does anyone have anything they've thought of during this, resonated with them, or anything they think could be a solution?
I made some notes, so I'm happy to go first. Yeah, let me just, I can't now actually read my own writing back, which isn't very helpful. That was the first thing that I wrote, was just that listening to everyone who spoke today, and thank you to everyone who did take part. There was a real kind of like recurrent theme of frustration at the system, dealing with the Home Office, and kind of like the frustration that we all feel as professionals or as carers or journalists, listeners, whatever our role is, and how, and I know we all then are even more conscious of how that feels for the young people that we work with. But then actually that frustration, I just then, although that seemed to be a theme, that seems to be a really huge theme, there is also that theme of hope. And I felt just us being here together today, just really hopeful, and just sharing, even though not everything that is shared was positive, but just sharing between ourselves is powerful. And again, that inspired me for us to work together and create safe spaces for young people to share together, because of the impact I know that it has for us on events like today, the positive impact that can have for them to have a safe space to share. Because even though it might feel like a session, nothing has changed from the start of this session to the end of this session. However, if what has changed is a renewed sense of hope, then that is something positive to be taking forward. And I can't wait for us to facilitate that more for our young people. I can stop and take a breath because I have more, so I'll do that. But
just to say the positivity. I was at the conference yesterday, and it was about the legal aspect, nationality and borders bill, and how things were done. But they brought up certified refusal, where young people were told, right, this is your age, you can't appeal this. It happened with a lot of Albanian. And it was challenged in the course, and you've seen the numbers drop off those certified refusals of those, and it, so the law is listening as well. And there's, like Miranda said, there are so many great minds at work on this, as well as so many passionate people. I mean, we've got this opportunity of coming together, like you said, Kelly, of today, you know, even the negative sides we can work with and we can learn from and build activities and get young people's voices out there. Yeah, I think there's a lot to be positive about.
Yeah.
Hope that other people, I'm hoping that other people will feel positive about this. And as I said, if anyone's got any questions or wants to make a comment about what they've heard, that'd be absolutely brilliant. We're here to answer any questions.
One of my notes that I wrote was, I think it was John. A lot of what he said was really powerful, but a particular part where he said that he's yet to meet or know of an abuser who does as much kind of damage as the homeless. And I've heard I've heard it before, and it's really, really hard and really, really heartbreaking. And again, it was one of those moments in this that felt like a real low, and because it is, and that we see that, but actually within that is just a strong and powerful statement and a reminder of why that it's not, there's so many different elements to what we're all trying to do, and that is obviously one of them, the support with that side of things. And it just it's a huge driving force, and just inspires you to want to make that change and to not hear that, because that shouldn't be the way that things are.
Yeah. Oh, without a doubt. And we have a question off Natalie. Yeah. So quickly there. Do you see many refugees affected by disability discrimination, as well as their refugee status making them more vulnerable? I think disability always does make people more vulnerable, particularly refugees, with circumstances they're under. We see it time and time again, disabled refugees harder to access support mechanisms, for example, necessary needs. How do you see it?
I think your sound was cutting out a little bit then. I don't know if it's the same for everyone else.
So just saying, I think when it comes to disability discrimination with refugees, there is a huge issue. Obviously, a variety of different disabilities, things that we might want to use different words for. But for example, it's the unseen ones, mental trauma, where people can't talk about it. And modern new rules are that people have to come in a set period of time and tell everything about their trauma and everything. And that isn't how life works. It takes time to build trust, to be able to open up to somebody, and it can take years. So I think there is always going to be a form of discrimination in that. And how do you feel on that?
I agree. And I think it's the having to kind of, there are processes in place that would say that they're there to help a refugee who's disabled, for example, but actually sometimes those processes haven't been thought about, the accessibility of how they might have to attend that interview to explain this, their capability, like you say, their mental capacity to go there and do that at that time. It's actually it's another system in terms of the world of disability and the support they might need from that, for them to have to unfortunately battle with to actually access the support that they need.
Yeah, and without that support, it does make them vulnerable, because if you don't have a support mechanism, you don't have your needs aren't being met, then you do become more vulnerable. And sadly, as we've heard today, there are plenty of people out there who will prey on those vulnerabilities. Yes, so in answer, I hope that answers your question. But yes, so it does. I think we would say agree on that it does make them more vulnerable. But again, this goes back to what John said of the two-tier system, effectively, of support that happens with young people, and that's something we've really got to address in this country. Is that everybody needs support. and equal to their needs. It's just not happening. The Home Office are denying that. They're running a rogue system almost, where immigration enforcement trumps everything, child protection, and the whole manner. So, do we work with charities like Family Voices and Carers Trust? That's good question, because we work with quite a number of different charities, and we do try and ensure that we are getting as many viewpoints. We're part of large groups such as Refugee Migrant Children Consortium, where we will work with a variety of NGOs to ensure that we're getting as many different voices into things as possible, because no NGO on its own can cover everything and can do everything. And you need that inclusivity. You need NGOs which are centered on children, on people who are vulnerable, who are inclusive within their own units as well, to ensure that you're seeing everything from every angle. Otherwise, the way I would see the world is completely different from the way Kelly would see the world, and definitely different from the way one of the young people we work with see the world. So yes, you can inclusivity, and we do work with a range of different charities on that, which we're getting as many people as possible. Anything else? Thank you. How can we help spread your notoriety and help your resource access? That sharing what we talk about as widely as possible, because we're a small charity in size, but I think it's safe to say we have a big impact. We do a lot out there. We work with a lot of other charities, but we try and lead on conversations. We're not afraid to stick our heads above the carpet. And you will see us crop up in different things, but it's sharing that and making sure people are aware, because sometimes you can get dwarfed by larger organizations. And just even promoting on social media, or we do regular newsletters and keep people up to date with those, sharing that information, sharing events like this. The more people who come to hear from a variety of different voices, the more that spreads, and that then leads to being able to access different areas, different resources, and more support for ourselves as well, so we can support young people we work with. Kaylee, do you have?
Yeah, no, I think just yeah, everything you said, just sharing and engaging in terms of social media, and just being here today is contributing to that, and being here today. I mean, I look forward to more events like this, online and in person, and just spreading that message that there's still always so much to be learned for everybody, and I think we learn through others, and sharing that message further with more people, enabling more people to learn.
Because you work with some absolutely fantastic organisations, don't you? Particularly the arts and creativity side of it.
And that's I'm really excited, obviously, about all the future collaborative work, and I just see things getting bigger and bigger. I think there's another question. Is it possible? Sorry, let me try again.
Natalie, this one, what I can do is I'll speak to my colleagues and we can get that. If you can privately message an email, or I'll put my email address in the chat, and we can look into that for you.
Yeah, I've just seen Edwina's message about sharing the poem. So our young person has given me permission to verbally share the poem, and so what I would just need to do, and is just double check that she would be happy for us to then also share a physical copy, for example. And we have had that discussion, but we kind of took it in a step-by-step process about it being something that we could potentially share on our social media in its written form. So yeah, I would really like to do that, and that is what her original intention was with it. And actually, she'd written it a little while ago, but had held on to it. And it was when we were discussing writing in the arts, and she each week usually shares something new with me. She shared that, and that's how it came about for us to share it today. So yeah, I would really love for us to be able to share a physical written copy. I actually think one day she could write a book of all the things she's written, and that's kind of where our conversations lead. But yeah, as soon as that's done, if maybe it's something we could put in the newsletter or share on our social media, but I would really like to do that.
If she gives permission, I guarantee we will share it, because I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah.
Pass on.
And she writes some really incredible pieces. Sometimes they're really short, sometimes it's just a couple of lines, and I feel like the way she can encapsulate something in literally like 2 sentences just amazes me. And sometimes she refers to what she's writing as really negative, and she says, who would want to see this because it's so dark or it's so negative? But the way I feel about her work is that you're explaining, or you're managing to get a thought from here to here, that there are going to be many other young people that have that and aren't able to do that and aren't able to articulate it. So although reading it may not change the negative tone of it, it actually can just make somebody feel less alone. So we're doing some work together around her confidence and her self-belief in the incredible work that she's doing. So hopefully there'll be more we can share in the future.
I hope so. You hit the nail on the head of people being able to read it and realise they're not alone. That in itself, no matter how negative it is, it creates that positivity from the next. Do we have any more questions? So, in that case, what I want to say thank you so much to all of our speakers, everyone who's part, to Dr. Ella Cockbain, Miranda Kelly, John Stokes, Hayden, Nicola Kelly, Kaylee for her video and for taking part in this. Imogen, Phil, I'm so sorry that your video didn't get played, but we will be using that video across various platforms, so you will get to see it. But thank you very much for stepping in at the last minute. And thank you so much for everyone who's attending, because without you being here, there would be no point in us talking like this. So it makes all the difference. And I hope that people have got something from this, and there is positivity out there, whether it's being able to hear the voices of the young people, having them actually express themselves. And I can't wait for what Kaylee's planning, what you're or what the future holds for us campaigning and what we can do. Because I think together we all will pull this off, we will succeed, and we will protect. I just want to say thank you very much.
And thank you to you, Dan, for facilitating everything. I feel like I know I'm coming away with, like I said, a real renewed sense of hope and optimism today. So thank you for bringing us all together and facilitating the conversations.
Thank you very much. I was worried I might be trying to sound too bad times, by the way, and a slight Blue Peter element there. But no, I just want to say thank you so much to everyone. It's been a great event. It is 5:00, and we will take any more questions if anyone has any. But otherwise, we will draw it to a close. And thank you for your comments as well, Natalie, Edwina. Thank you.
Thank you.
In that case, I just want to say good night, and I hope everyone can enjoy the sunshine and have a great week.